BBCADVERTISINGinRead invented by TeadsADVERTISINGinRead invented by TeadsKwasi Kwarteng accused Evan Davis of failing to discuss the positives of Brexit. The MP for Spelthorne was invited onto the show to discuss the hold-up in the negotiations with the EU after an agreement on the Irish border question fell through at the last minute. Mr. Davis asked the parliamentarian to comment on claims from Ian Duncan-Smith that Britain should leave the trade bloc with no deal if the EU were unwilling to move on their position regarding the Irish border. Mr. Kwarteng tried to outline why he thought negotiations were going well and there would be no need to leave the Brussels club without a deal when Mr. Davis tried to move the conversation on. Related articles. Dimbleby finally admits BBC Question Time audience has a pro-EU bias. Fury as BBC launches condescending pro-EU propaganda video. The host started to say, "It's going very well except for a couple of very difficult things, so rather than talking about all the successes let's just focus on the," but an angry Mr. Kwarteng interrupted and criticized the BBC programme for failing to be balanced by not discussing the positives surrounding the negotiations. He exclaimed, "But you didn't mention any of the successes. I think it's very important viewers realize that the talks are going quite well." The BBC's video report that aired before the interview with the Conservative had focused on problems surrounding the deal and failed to mention how much had been achieved in the exit process over the past few months. In an attempt to protect the impartial image of the BBC, Mr. Davis quickly said, "We've been mentioning the successes for days." Later in the interview, the MP who works in Philip Hammond's office once again reminded Mr. Davis of his failure to discuss the positives. He quipped, "We've got a negotiation with the EU, which is going very well, but you wanted to align that, you didn't want to dwell on that." The encounter is not the first time that the broadcaster's flagship news analysis program has come under fire for being overly negative about Brexit. In June, the leader of the House, Andrea Leadsom, clashed with Emily Maitlis on the show. Speaking on Newsnight, Ms. Maitlis tore into the Conservative MP as she asked what was currently going well with the government. She said, "You've got a negotiating position which is completely unclear. You're hearing that from the President of the EU Parliament." B7 Davis tried to move the Tory MP away from discussing the Brexit successes. "Many believe our economy is unfair. Living standards are falling." After being confronted with the issues, Mrs. Leadsom replied by suggesting that her interrogator should be more positive about Brexit. She said, "Of course it is very early days, but it would help if broadcasters were willing to be a bit patriotic." The country took a decision. This government is determined to deliver on that decision. Related articles. BBC blames Brussels' secrecy for failing to scrutinise EU on Brexit. MP blasts BBC crowd full of EU berets for heckling Brexit views. Outrage as BBC internship scheme only open to those who aren't white.